everyone's at a different level of understanding and on a different curve, right? So what works for me may not necessarily work for you. So maybe you love outlining or maybe you love editing. If that's the case, then totally jump into it, dive into it. I think that everybody has a different path, and I think everyone's creative process is going to be different, and you have to embrace what you like. But I think that you also have to pay attention to what you don't like, right? Because if you're going to do this, and I think most of the people listening to this show, if you're planning on doing this for the rest of your life, you damn well better love it. And if there's a part of the process that you don't love, if you don't love every single part of the process equally, or you're not willing to do each of those parts every single day when you wake up, then you really have to take a look at that. Because if you find yourself forced into doing things that you don't enjoy in a career that you love, that's what leads to burnout. You just heard a clip from an interview I did with Dan Blank on the Dabblers versus Doers podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking about patience and why and how I'm in the writing business for the long haul. I'm Michael Laron, and this is the Writer's Journey podcast, where you get a window into the life of a working science fiction and fantasy author. I'm on a mission to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I share my progress and discover what inspires my books and how I write them. You can find the show notes for today's episode at michaellaron.com/podcast. This week, I'm talking about the writing life. Hello and welcome to episode 22. This week I wanted to spend some time talking about patience because it's something I have in spades, but many authors don't always have it. Patience for me means that even though I know I'm not as successful as I want to be today, it's being okay with today because I know that I'll be where I want to be down the road. So many people jump into writing expecting to be crazy successful right out of the gate. I myself was no exception to this. When I published my first book, Magic Souls, I thought I'd be a six-figure author by the end of the year. Ha ha, that's super funny. It didn't happen, not even nowhere near that happened, right? But the truth is that while Magic Souls was a good book, there were a lot of things I did wrong. Not with the story, because it's a solid story, but with the marketing. My original book cover didn't speak to readers. I bought ads at all the wrong places, I spent my time chasing the wrong readers, and most important of all, I had zero clue where my book fit in the market. Top that off with a poor author website, a lackluster social media presence, no author brand, and many other things that I don't have time to go into today, then you have a recipe for what most people would call a failed book launch. But you know what I think? The book was a success. Sure, it didn't make any money, but I chose to focus on the positive lessons. In writing Magic Souls, I learned so much about the writing process that I could use to write my next book faster. The readers who did review the book absolutely loved it. Just weren't that many people that reviewed it. That's okay. The launch also taught me that my goals were too damn unrealistic. It taught me that I wasn't as good of an author as I thought I was. It was definitely a lesson in humility, right? It taught me that there was a big wide world out there that I needed to learn and that I had a lot to learn. And instead of sulking over it, I wrote my next book, taking the lessons that I learned and applying them to that book. 40 books later, you think I'd be doing something right. I am. Right now I'm doing a lot of things right. The fact that you're listening to this podcast every week means that I've done my job as both an author and a storyteller. I've sharpened my storytelling skills to keep you listening to this show day in and day out every week. I've sharpened my storytelling skills to keep you listening to this show every week. In 2014, when I first started off, no one on this earth would have wanted to hear me do a podcast like this. Trust me on that. I didn't have the skill set. For my books, I know my target audiences now. My covers are infinitely better. I don't just have books, I have a brand. All of that because I committed to getting better rather than beating myself up over sales numbers. Patience for me isn't doing the same thing over and over again. It's about iteration and introspection. I spend a lot of time by myself just thinking. One of my strengths is that I'm fairly self-aware, but I don't allow myself to get stuck or allow myself to get in my own way. I know myself and I confirm a path and just charge on. I know that long term, I'm going to be in a much better position than I am today. All because I'm better today than I was in 2004 when I first started. It's just the law of exponential numbers, you know? Everything I do in my career is simply practice. I'm practicing my craft with every new story. I'm practicing how to market a book with every new book launch. I'm practicing how to do a podcast and conduct myself better every time I get behind the microphone. This podcast is actually one big practice session in how to create content that connects with people on a human level. So is my YouTube channel. Everything for me is one big experiment, and I'm totally fine with failing. And just about everything I have done has failed on some level. I opened the show with an excerpt about burnout. There are only a few things that make me wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Burnout is one of them. Patience and burnout go hand in hand for me. After all, I've been doing this for 5 years, and it's really easy to think that maybe I should just quit. But I refuse. But burnout is real, and I do everything I can to avoid it. And the easiest way to avoid burnout is to see the positive in everything. For example, I don't necessarily enjoy editing this podcast, but I do it because I have to, and I see it as a valuable learning experience for when I'm successful enough to hire someone to edit my audio and video for me. Doing the work myself now will make it easier for me to give direction and clarity to a future employee who will do this for me. So I learned to like editing and I have fun with it. That's my secret. I'm eternally optimistic and I'm always twisting things in order to see the lesson and the benefit, even setbacks. Hell, I view patches of writer's block as blessings sometimes. That takes a mindset shift and a level of patience that many people don't have. I know that in order to be successful and have a long-term career, I've got to 1, keep creating, and 2, avoid burnout at all costs because it will stop me from creating. And when you don't create content, you don't bring in readers. When you don't bring in readers, everything spirals in a downward path. So the key is to keep creating, the key is to never give up, and the key is to keep learning, iterating, and being self-aware at where you're weak and working on those weaknesses, but also remembering where your strengths are and playing to those as well. And honestly, your strengths are probably way more important. So I create content patiently with no expectations, and I have fun with my writing. So if it takes me 15 or 20 years more to be successful and make a living from my work, I'm okay with that. I can't wait to see how much more skillful and developed I'll be as an author and a human being when I get there. But if it happens tomorrow, I'll also be ready for it because I've been preparing every day, every minute, every second for the day that my life will change. And when it does, sure, my circumstances will change. My problems will get magnified. My schedule will probably be crazier than it is today. But I myself won't change because ultimately I've been preparing all this time not to write a best-selling book, but to be myself in public. 100% authentic and true to myself and my readers so that the books that they read, the interactions they have with me, the things that I leave behind when I'm 6 feet in the ground will be memorable, professional, and top-notch. And that's easier said than done. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed the show, here are a couple ways to help a brother out. If you're listening to this on Anchor, favorite the show. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, do me a favor and write me a review and share it with your friends. You can, of course, visit my website and learn more about my work at michaellaron.com. If you have a question, send me a voice message on Anchor and you just might hear it on the show. Next week, I'll be reading a page from my writer's sketchbook. Until then, I leave you with a quote. Good, better, best. Never let it rest till your good is better and your better is best. St. Jerome.